I know Devin very well. Tremendous fighter. He grew up in this gym. Excellent fighter. Okay? He signed with a promoter who don't know what the fuck he's doing. Okay? He's fucked off over $1 billion and still hasn't built one fucking star in the United States. Okay? I applaud Bill. Very smart guy. And I applaud Devin. They signed with a guy. They made a bunch of fucking money, and that's what they supposed to do. They supposed to do. But again, it's like, ain't no slight on them, you know, but when you're talking about Tank Davis, I gotta pay you what you weigh. I gotta pay you what you weigh. And you can just read in between the lines, but as far as being a draw, then it's self-explanatory. So you can't make a fight like that. Now, Devin has a tremendous opportunity in front of him. Now when you're talking about you bring in all of this and you build on that, and it's like, that's a different ballgame.
Is it really? Another angle to a story we touched on in my previous video. Why was it that Mayweather Promotions didn't put more effort into matching Gervonta Davis against Devin Haney, even though Devin Haney was in fact in possession of an alphabet title, a full title, unlike the one Gervonta Davis is set to defend against his stablemate Rolly Romero. I just told you they can't afford him. Leonard Ellerby's not going to come right out and say it that way, but that is what he's communicating, that Devin made very good money at Matchroom. But as far as they're concerned, they're not going to overpay him the same way that Matchroom did. And you think about what's happening right now, what's set to go down in the very near future. Devin Haney and George Kambosos Jr., they are set to lock horns for the undisputed lightweight championship of the world. Here and now, your guess is as good as mine as far as who wins that fight, who ends up this division's undisputed champion. Though when the smoke settles, when the smoke clears and one man is left standing, do you get the impression that the winner of that fight is going to fight on the cheap? Do you think the winner of that fight is going to let Gervonta Davis B-side them? In your own mind's eye, after George Kambosos Jr. spent so much time abroad, fighting abroad, away from his native Australia, unseated Teofimo Lopez in his own backyard, in his own country, if he emerges as this division's undisputed champion, do you get the sense he's going to bend over for Gervonta Davis, a secondary champion? You think he's going to play second fiddle to Gervonta Davis? I am not jumping to conclusions or making bold proclamations. I am simply asking a question. After everything George Kambosos Jr. has done to get to this point, if he emerges as this division's undisputed champion, do you get the sense that he's going to allow Gervonta Davis to B-side him? And what about Devin Haney? Look at all the sacrifices he's making. If he wins that fight, you think he's going to bend over for Gervonta and Leonard? He had to go to Australia in order to even get the goddamn fight. He did? There's a rematch clause involved, and he may have to get through that. But if he emerges as the victor, if he is the last man standing, you guys get the sense that Devin Haney's going to bend over for Gervonta. You get the sense that Bill Haney, his dad, think he's going to let him? You don't do all this so that you end up bending over to anybody. You're already making sacrifices right now. You've sacrificed enough as it is. If you actually emerge the victor in this situation, what are you going to do? You're going to turn around and bend over for Gervonta Davis and Leonard Ellerby. Let those guys B-side you. If they couldn't afford Devin Haney's price tag before, if he was too expensive for them before, what's he going to be if he becomes this division's undisputed champion? Read between the lines, you fucking moron. Listen to what Leonard said. He's acknowledging that Devin was making great money at Matchroom. Making great money, which, you know, he's supposed to do that. He's supposed to pursue the most rewards. That's what he's supposed to do as a prize fighter. But that was more than Leonard and Mayweather Promotions were willing to give him, and that was before. Becomes an undisputed champion at this weight. You think his price tag's gonna go down? No, it's gonna go up. Leonard prides himself on the work he's done with Gervonta, attempting to develop him into a marquee fighter. He says he's the biggest name anywhere at or around these weights. Well, it doesn't count for much if you can't afford a little old Devin Haney. See, he wants some guys like me and you to believe that Gervonta Davis is a cash cow. But what kind of cash cow can't afford to pay for top opposition? What kind of cash cow? You could retire on the money you make fighting Anthony Joshua, you know. Could retire. Like, you know, buy yourself a little Toyota Corolla, open up a small business, put away a little something in the bank, a little nest egg for a rainy day. You could do a lot of things with the amount of money you get paid to fight in Anthony Joshua, because Anthony Joshua is a cash cow. He can't afford to pay top opposition. Same applies to Canelo Alvarez. Caleb Plant made an estimated $10 million fucking fighting that guy, right? Fuck! Gervonta Davis, he's supposed to be a cash cow. That's how you talk about him. That's what they say. And he can't afford Devin Haney.
He can sell a couple of tickets, but a cash cow.
Leonard Ellaby's always calling him a cash cow, but I don't see a cash cow. I see a guy who can sell a couple of tickets, maybe a few pay-per-views. Maybe. I say maybe because,
Maybe.
Leonard's been taking jabs at Eddie in reference to the recent Canelo Alvarez versus Dimitri Bivol pay-per-view, saying things like it only sold 300,000. Never mind what that sold. What did Davis versus Isaac Cruz sell?
You want to talk about pay-per-view buys? Let's talk about yours.
But he was real fucking tight-lipped.
Real quiet.
After that fight, no reported buys from the sources whatsoever. I mean, nothing. And what's this upcoming fight gonna do, the Rolly Romero fight? You think people are more excited for this fight than they were for that fight?
Well, you go saying anything about what Canelo did at the box office. What did your fighter do at the box office?
What the fuck did he do at the box office? What has he been doing? Because apparently Devin Haney is out of his price range. You guys can't afford to pay him what he makes.
Hey, I'm just saying, I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for Gervonta to fight the winner of that fight.
Winner Haney versus Kambosos. Yeah, Gervonta's got a belt, secondary belt, whatever. I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for Gervonta to fight the winner of that fight, because I don't get the sense that the winner of that fight, whoever it ends up being, I don't get the sense they're going to fight on the cheap. In other news, Lineal, Ring Magazine, and Unified 140-pound champion Josh Taylor sent a letter of appreciation to the WBA, a letter that reads, I have been a proud WBA champion since 2019 when I defeated Regis Prograrius. Unfortunately, due to my upcoming wedding and honeymoon, this summer I am unable to fulfill my mandatory obligations and defend against Alberto Puello in a timely fashion. I do not want to delay a fellow fighter's fulfilling his own career dreams, and for that reason I must respectfully vacate. I wish the best to the fighters who will contest for the vacant title and look forward to being a WBA champion again in the future. When news broke that the WBA title had gone vacant, Josh Taylor assured the fight fans that he wasn't stripped of the title, he willfully vacated it. It was a decision that he made. It seems that time has proven him right, though the difference appears to be a difference of semantics. Stripped or vacated, all the same, the title's up for grabs. And it's up for grabs because you couldn't meet the WBA's deadline to satisfy your mandatory challenger. You vacated it.
But you wouldn't have had to if it wasn't for the deadline you couldn't meet.
So it is tantamount to being stripped in many ways. Josh Taylor himself said, and there you go. Vacated, not stripped. Have a nice weekend. Well, that makes Josh feel better.
He wouldn't have had to vacate anything if it wasn't for the deadline he couldn't meet.
That makes him feel better. It's all the same. He is no longer this division's undisputed champion. He still is the man to beat at 140 pounds in many ways, in spite of not being this division's undisputed champion anymore. He still is in possession of most of the alphabet titles, the coveted Ring Magazine belt, and he is
He's lineal.
There's
winning the titles, and then there's keeping them.
both of which can be arduous tasks, though one can prove more difficult than the other. There's winning the belts, and then there's hanging on to them. And because Josh Taylor still is in possession of most of the alphabet titles at this weight, well, he's got a bullseye on his back that a lot of guys are shooting for. Barboza Box, boxing scribe Barboza Box tweeted, the IBF 140-pound interim world championship is coming up. Subriel Matias versus Jeremiah Ponce. What a shot for God. He's going to make a butcher shot.
I think most people are picking Subriel Matias to win that fight.
That is the same Subriel Matias that fought Maxim Dadashev well over a year ago, and we all know how that worked out. We all know about the punching power of Puerto Rico's own hard-punching Subriel Matias. This goes back to what I told you guys before. The 140-pound division, whilst not being one of the glamour weights, it ain't for the faint of heart either. It's a very deep division. It's a very deep weight class. And there's a lot of guys that are gunning for what it is Josh Taylor's got. He's got most of those alphabet titles. The winner of this fight becomes his mandatory challenger by way of the IBF. And you remember what the WBC said. The WBC said they're next in the rotation. After that
comes the IBF.
Then last comes the WBO. The WBO's mandatory challenger. They're last in the rotation because, well, the last mandatory challenger Josh satisfied was for the WBO, Jack Catterall. So it will be some time before he has to satisfy another one. And who knows what the state of the weight class will be by that time, because we are talking about some weeks and months from now. There's winning the belts and then there's keeping them.
It's gonna be hard.
140 pounds ain't for the faint of heart. Subriel Matias, he's over there on the PBC side of things. That's another angle of this, another element of this story you must consider.
Does the PBC send Subriel Matias over when the time comes?
That's assuming he beats Jeremiah's Ponce. I think most people think that he can. Most people think that he will. And if he does, when the time comes, will they send him over to Top Rank? Because he's not exactly a big ticket seller. He's not exactly a well-known guy. Only really hardcore fans know about Subriel Matias and what he can do, what he's capable of. Though, when the time comes, will the PBC make things difficult, or will they simply send him over for his title shot? Well, they did Marcus Brown.
That's assuming Josh Taylor's still champion. What if he loses to Jose Zapata?
That's the guy he's got in front of him right now. And the story is those negotiations are already underway. It's likely set to go down on the Top Rank side of things. That's where both those boys fight. Better still, who's to say that Josh Taylor still even is champion for Subriel Matias to potentially become his problem?
Shit, what if Jose Zapata beats him?
Finally, a story from last week that I didn't get to talk about here on the channel. Dimitri Bivol is not 100% sure if he can make 168 pounds for a Canelo Alvarez rematch.
In the past, he's said that he can make that weight easy, that he'd be willing to come down for Canelo, he'd be willing to come down for Callum Smith.
But maybe it's not as easy to make 168 pounds for Dimitri as Dimitri might have initially thought. He was quoted as saying, "We can talk about it, fighting the rematch at 168, with Canelo's team." Bivol said on the DAZN Boxing Show, "We can talk. It's not 100% that I will not fight at 168. No, we can talk about it. I'm not sure 100% of fighting at 168, Bivol continued. Before coronavirus, I was sure. After coronavirus, I gained weight a little bit. Too much eating. Eat, no fighting."
Bivol went more than a year and a half without fighting during that lockdown.
Look, just being honest, as a boxing fan and a consumer of the sport, I don't actually want to see Dimitri Bivol drop down to 168 pounds and face Canelo. If he's going to fight Canelo for a second time, I'd prefer it be at 175 pounds or not at all.
If Canelo were to beat him at 168, people'd start harping about how Dimitri was drained.
That's what they're going to say. They wouldn't give Canelo Alvarez credit for a victory over Dimitri at 168 pounds, but at 175.
Can Canelo beat him at 175 pounds?
This is why I said they should nix any talks of an immediate rematch for the time being. Dimitri beat Canelo Alvarez decisively.
There's really no question who won that fight.
I think Canelo should go ahead with the Golovkin trilogy. That's what I think.
Fantastic, and obviously with that Bivol thing, we're not quite sure whether Canelo will fight him next. Do you genuinely believe that if Canelo chooses to fight Triple G in a trilogy fight, the winner of this fight will fight Bivol next?
I think, look, obviously if Canelo Alvarez ends up fighting Triple G and then Bivol's going to need an interim fight, and there's no one we'd like more to fight him than the winner of this fight, or maybe even Callum Smith as well. So we're in a good position for that, but we'll see what Canelo Alvarez decides.
There's been a lot of questions asked to you this week about kind of the success of DAZN. Why do you think that is?
Because there's a lot of people who have agendas in boxing. So all I can tell you is the success of DAZN is fantastic, particularly in America now, after really finding their feet. The pay-per-view numbers were huge on Canelo, subscription numbers are huge. We've had a great start here as well. We've got some huge fights to be announced this summer and beyond as well. We're in a great position, and I just think that people like to sort of I see shows getting announced that I read the reactions and it's like, wow, great show, and I'm like, if I did that show, I'd be absolutely crucified.
Approximately 3 to 4 years after DAZN's debut in the United States, in the American market, you will find that there are still content creators out there that want the platform to fail, even though I don't know why. It has literally, quite literally, delivered some of the biggest fights and many of the sport's biggest upsets in recent memory. I mean, Joshua versus Ruiz, Teofimo Lopez versus George Kambosos Jr.,
Mauricio Lara versus Josh Warrington,
Kid Galahad versus Kiko Martinez, Canelo Alvarez versus Dimitri Bivol. Not even exclusive to upsets, big shows, big fights overall, like Joshua versus Usyk. Like,
how big do you think that fucking rematch is going to be?
Regardless of who wins or loses, there's a question as to who will get the UK rights to that fight. Will Anthony Joshua make a decision to continue to box on Sky in the United Kingdom, give them the UK rights for his very next fight, his rematch with Alexander Usyk, or will he so decide to go all in with DAZN? There's a question there.
There is, but it's not a question for an American fight fan. man.
Not really, because regardless of where the UK rights to Anthony Joshua's next fight go to, whether they go to Sky or they go to DAZN, here in America, in all likelihood, where we're going to be seeing that guy, where we're going to be seeing that fight, is by way of DAZN. So when you think about that, you think of all these other fights you've gotten to see by way of DAZN, and there are actually people out there that would have you believe it's not a good platform, it's not value for money, in spite of all the fights we've already seen, all the major fights and the big upsets, the big shows, the big crowds, and what else they have in store for the fight fans here in America. Bam Rodriguez versus Sorung Visai, and just that entire card is better than most of what's out there by way of these other promotional outfits and these other...
It's not a pay-per-view.
Because not every good fight that is a good fight needs to be. That's not saying that PBC hasn't put on some good shows and some big fights of their own. You know, Spence versus Ugas, and last week, Charlo versus Castaño too. Those were good cards, but they don't put on cards like that anywhere near as much as Matchroom does. Not in the same abundance, not as frequently, the frequency.
Frequency of those kinds of fights and those kinds of shows.
A lot was made when Frank Warren beat out Eddie Hearn for the rights to the Fury versus Vite fight, and it did turn out to be a big fight. You know, I thought it would be. I thought it would.
And it did.
But, you know, aside from that fight, what other fights that scale, that size? What other big fights does Queensbury Promotions and BT, what other fights do they have in store for the fight fans? Because near as I can tell, a lot of the people who are very critical of Eddie Hearn and the DAZN platform, they just so happen to have a soft spot for Frank Warren, for Tyson Fury. But you as a boxing fan, you tell me, what other fights does Frank got in store for you guys since you're so fucking sweet on him? The way you're shitting on Eddie Hearn, you're shitting on the DAZN platform as if Frank is doing better.
Well, you don't like this weekend's fight between Joshua Buatsi and Craig Richards?
It's a good fucking fight. You get fights like that by way of Matchroom and DAZN on a regular basis. Now, you tell me, how many fights like that is Frank putting on? Because Eddie Hearn and Matchroom, they put on fights like that all the time.
You're so fucking forgiving of Frank Warren, but critical of Eddie Hearn. Make it make sense.
And upon Canelo Alvarez's return, regardless of who he ends up fighting, whether it's Dmitry Bivol or Gennady Golovkin for a third time, what do you think is going to be a bigger fight than that? Who else is going to be putting on a bigger fight than the ring return of Canelo Alvarez right off his latest loss? You guys don't see the forest for the trees.
Nope.
Well, you don't want to.
There ain't gonna be no other show bigger than that one in the United States, believe you me. Not even Crawford versus Spence.
I love that fucking fight. I've been waiting for it for 4 fucking years, but I'm telling you right here and right now, there won't be a bigger show in the United States than Canelo Alvarez's ring return. Not even that one.
And that show is going to be a Matchroom show.
So stop fucking lying to yourselves.